going on, everybody? Marvel the Cross 316 back with another Amazing Spider-Man review, and today we are viewing and reviewing Amazing Spider-Man issue number 2. So yesterday we reviewed number 1, so today we're going with number 2 of issue 2. This came out in May of 1963. May of 1963. We are looking at that, where we are going to be reviewing 2 stories today from this comic book. We're going to be, like always, review the storyline and the artwork. Today's villain is the Vulture. So Spider-Man, duel to the death with the Vulture. It's a great comic book. When I was reading this, it was such a great story to be a early Silver Age book. It was really great. As always, this is written by Stan Lee, artwork by Steve Ditko. Again, Vulture, one of Spider-Man's underrated villains. He is by far a very cool villain. Totally more cool, in my view, than the chameleon that we looked at from the other day or yesterday. The Vulture is a lot more cooler. So we'll start out with the story here. Instead of having the Vulture have an origin story like most comic books, when they introduce a villain, they have an origin story. They start out, the villain may have be a normal person, then all of a sudden he becomes a villain. But that's not how Stan Lee scripts this book. We start out with the Vulture already having his wings and being the threat that he is. So there's a new threat in New York City. Basically, the Vulture snatches this suitcase from this guy. He basically says, "It's the Vulture. He stole my briefcase with a fortune in bonds. Help!" So again, the Vulture being who he is, like most villains in the Silver Age, they like to steal things. That's just a common theme. So we have the people in bewilderment, pretty much. They are like, I can't believe what has happened. This guy, how is he flying? Now we're going back to J. Jonah Jameson. As you remember, J. Jonah Jameson hates Spider-Man. He is on he has his own agenda, basically, to write as many newspaper articles about Spider-Man to basically diminish his reputation. We learn from this issue that he is the editor of the Now magazine. And so we learn also that they are struggling getting photos of Spider-Man because Spider-Man is always in action. He is hard to get. It's hard to get photos of Spider-Man because he's so quick. So J. Jonah Jameson's pretty mad about this. Of course, Peter Parker, being a high school guy, he's in high school still. People are talking about the Vulture because the Vulture is new to the scene. He's a big threat to New York, so it's on everybody's mind. Peter Parker learns about the Vulture, and he basically learns that maybe I should be the one to take his photo, since he is in fact Spider-Man. Now, another character, we looked at Liz Allen yesterday. She is the blonde right there, but we also need to learn about Flash Thompson. He made his first appearance as well in Amazing Fantasy 15. He is Peter Parker's rival and the big bully. So he's always given Peter Parker a lot of grief. We also learned from this issue, and this issue is it is a really key issue, not only for the first appearance of the Vulture, but we learn also how Spider-Man basically takes his photos. And so how he takes his photos basically is Aunt May gives Peter Parker Uncle Ben's old camera. So this whole time, as we've been reading, if you've ever been a big reader of Amazing Spider-Man, you learn in issue 2 that the camera that Peter Parker uses is Uncle Ben's. So again, that just adds to the great storyline, great storytelling of Stan Lee. He was ahead of his time. Spider-Man puts on his costume. He wants to pretty much test out the camera. The Vulture, as we learned in this story, basically, is that there is going to be a Park Avenue jewelry exchange. They're moving jewelry to a new store. The Vulture learns that it's $1 million worth of diamonds, and he wants to steal these diamonds. He learns this in the newspaper. He's like, no one will ever suspect that I can do this. I'll do it really quick so no one can know. The Vulture, he has his hidden lair basically on Staten Island. And as Spider-Man is testing out his camera, he sees the Vulture swoop down. The Vulture, I don't know how, does not see Spider-Man. But basically, the Vulture is planning to steal the jewelry. He sends a message to the police basically saying, I shall steal the diamond shipment from under your noses. He's pretty bold by saying that because he knows that the police cannot stop him. Spider-Man sees the Vulture, and the Vulture understands that, oh great, we got Spider-Man on my tail. He's a big threat. Let's try to go get him. The Vulture pretty much attacks him from behind and throws Spider-Man in this water tower. The Vulture flies off thinking Spider-Man is pretty much doomed. Spider-Man struggles for a little bit, but then he realizes that he could leap out of it through his great spider strength. Spider-Man comes back on the roof, collects his camera, and decides, I need to do something. I have to make some type of gadget to help me fight off the Vulture. We also learned from this storyline that we learned a lot about Spider-Man's equipment. He makes his belt so that he doesn't run out of Spider-Man or web fluid, because when he was trying to get out of the water tank, he basically could not because he was out of web fluid, so he makes his gadgets. We learned basically that Spider-Man, like always, is a genius. He can make the scientific equipment so that he can improve himself basically as a superhero. Peter Parker basically has collected photos from his battle with the Vulture. He brings them to J. Jonah Jameson. J. Jonah Jameson is surprised at how great the photos are, and Peter Parker says, I will continue to bring you photos as long as you do not ask me about how I get these photos. I want it to always be a secret. We always get back to now we're going back to the people now. We have Flash Thompson, we have Liz Allen. Everybody is in the streets waiting for the jewelry exchange. Peter Parker is there as well. Peter Parker says, you know what, I need to basically get out of the way because the Vulture could come at any time. But while Peter Parker walks away because he needs to change to Spider-Man, Flash Thompson thinks that Peter Parker is being a chicken. But of course, Peter Parker is not being that way. He just needs to change to Spider-Man. But of course, he can't explain himself because that would give his secret identity away. The police are waiting for the Vulture to come. They think, well, you know what, he's not coming, but Vulture takes them by surprise. He comes through a manhole, takes the jewelry, and flies away. The Vulture thinks that he has been victorious, but of course, the Spider-Man has something else to say about that. Spider-Man chases down the Vulture. The Vulture realizes that Spider-Man is on his tail, basically. So the Vulture tries to basically attack him like he did before, but this time Spider-Man has something up his sleeve. He has his new gadget. Spider-Man takes the gadget that he had made and basically uses it to make the Vulture fail his mission. Basically, the Vulture basically loses his balance and plummets on a rooftop. The police come, captures the Vulture, and the Vulture is going to prison. Now we learned that the gadget that Spider-Man used was a magnetic gadget of some sort. It was an anti-magnetic inverter. So Spider-Man, through his genius, basically learned that the Vulture was using um, magnetic wings to help him fly. But again, we are left with a lot of questions as to who the Vulture is and where does he come from, and that will leave the readers to want to learn more as they continue to read Spider-Man comic books. It's a great thing that the Stan Lee did to keep his audience in question. Basically, who is the Vulture? Where did he come from? Well, they'll have to continue to read. Peter Parker brings back the photos to J. Jonah Jameson. J. Jonah Jameson gives him a lot of money. Peter Parker basically pays off the rent for a year, telling Aunt May that there's nothing to worry about. And the Vulture, basically is left in prison, plotting his scheme to attack Spider-Man after he gets out of prison, or if he'll ever get out of prison. Okay, that's the end of the first story. We go now to the second story, which is The Terrible Threat of the Tinkerer. This is a lot shorter of a story than the first story. So let me be really quick as to this story. This story starts out with Peter Parker. He is in his class with his classmates. His professor basically tells this doctor that Peter Parker is the best science student that he has ever had. The doctor says, "Come with me, Peter Parker. I want you to help me with my experiments." And Peter Parker agrees. Flash Thompson, being the bully that he is, thinks that Peter Parker is being a snob. He thinks that, you know what, go ahead, do your experiments with the doctor. We'll just stay behind and be dummies. And Peter Parker's like, yeah, well, you're a dummy to begin with. Peter Parker puts on his Spider-Man suit just in case something ever happens. He goes to the Terrible Tinkerer's shop because that's where the doctor says to collect this radio. He comes, and right away he thinks this guy is something else. I mean, he's selling this radio for 10 cents. We learned that the Terrible Tinkerer he has like an underground lair where he is doing business with these group of aliens from another planet, and they've basically done something to this radio to help them collect secrets. They're trying to spy on the American government and the military. Peter Parker, being the genius that he is, suspects something is amiss. So he travels back to the Terrible Tinkerer's shop to see what is going on. He finds that the Tinkerer is in business with aliens. The aliens find that Spider-Man is spying on them, shoots or captures Spider-Man, and puts him in a glass cage that will basically get rid of the air. Spider-Man decides he has to be quick on this to figure out how he can get out of this. We learn a lot about Spider-Man's abilities, what he does when he shoots his webbing. You got cartridges of web fluid, adjustable spray nozzle, palm release button, and a safety catch-on. So that is how Spider-Man uses his web fluid. Spider-Man gets out of the cage, fights the aliens, and basically through that fighting, the laboratory burns to the ground. Spider-Man gets out of there because he knows that he will not survive much longer if he stays there. And on his way back, The aliens leave. The Doctor comes back, tells Peter Parker that he saw an alien ship fly away, but says, "Don't worry about it. It must have been my imagination." And we also learned that the Tinkerer was wearing a mask this whole time, and we don't know the true identity of the Tinkerer. And that is the end of this storyline. Beginning with next issue, many more great stories to come. That is the end of issue 2. I hope y'all enjoyed this quick review, and there will be more reviews to come. Thanks.